What's going on? This is MLS Chats. My name is Scott Churchson, and I have been a sports writer for the New York City Football Club since 2021. But more importantly, the person we're talking to today is the play-by-play broadcaster for the San Jose Earthquakes, as well as the San Jose Sharks. Today, we're talking to Mr. Ted Ramey. Sir, how the heck are you?
I'm great, and I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to talking about some Quakes. Always excited to get that done. So, yeah, man, thanks for putting up with me. I'll be long-winded, I promise.
It's okay. You know what? It's my privilege in this case. So let's set the tone a little bit right now. This has been a team that the Earthquakes have been a team that has struggled in the last few years. You know, they've had one playoff appearance, one playoff game in the last 4 years. Last year was obviously a very difficult season. You know, led the league in goals allowed, tied with New England for goal differential with negative 37, and honestly, just a really tough year. You know, when they came to NYCFC scored 5. And that's
including a hat trick in like 10 minutes.
Alonso Martinez's hat trick, where basically up to that point, nobody even knew who Alonso Martinez was until then. And they're like, okay, he became the king of Costa Rica at that point, right from that hat trick. So, but in this case here, what makes this special is the offseason. And this is where we're going to talk about this a little bit here, because the ownership has clearly made a determination that they were going to change the perspective that people have of the San Jose Earthquakes. You know, they bring in Chicho, they bring in Joseph Martinez, they bring in former Supporter Shield head coach in Bruce Arena. So there has been a different change and a different vibe even in the offseason. And then, of course, in game number 1, playing against Real Salt Lake and scoring 4 on them with a clean sheet. Talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about how it feels, how the fans are, and just anything you've got.
I think that, you know, the offseason, the way I've been talking about it, began when they parted ways with Luchi Gonzalez about halfway through the year last year. And last year, to go pull back a bit, no one saw that coming. In 2023, they were one of the most defensively stout teams in the league, especially at home. They made the playoffs. They lost in penalties against Sporting Kansas City, but it was seen as a step in the right direction, and they expected to take a greater step. That clearly did not. For those of us up close, it wasn't like it was Luchi's tactical decisions that were leading to all the issues. Number one was injuries. Our starting goalkeeper in Daniel, the Brazilian, who was arguably by the metrics the best the year before. He didn't start out well, and then he blew out his hamstring and was out for most of the season after having surgery. Our starting center back, who was acquired before the season began, he blew out his hamstring. He was out for a majority of the year, and you know that kind of set in motion a process of injuries that really hampered that back line. And then the backup keepers also just did not live up to their previous level of play. Will Yarborough, one of the best guys in the league, who's been a phenomenal keeper, he had for him just a career worst year. He just did not look at all like his normal self. So things snowballed, to say the least. But it kind of started at that point, and then with the season coming to a close, it didn't take long for the Bruce Arena rumors to start popping up. The hiring was made, I want to say, maybe right before Thanksgiving, maybe right after. I'm trying to remember, but it was in that stage. And then they started making the moves and bringing in Dave Romney and Ian Harkes and Mark Anthony Kaye from New England. And then they made a trade for Earl Edwards Jr., the backup keeper. He comes over from New England. Nick Lima, who had been in New England, he was a free agent. They signed him. Of course, he's the second ever homegrown signing with the San Jose Earthquakes and was familiar with the franchise and is from the Bay Area. So you get those players in, and everyone's kind of wondering what was next, because those were all good MLS veterans, but it wasn't it wasn't earth-shattering, for lack of a better term. And then the rumors started flying about Chicho Arango. They announced him on January 11th. And then on January 13th, they announced the signing of Joseph Martinez. And they got the press conference for those two guys together. And, you know, that was right about at the start of training camp when they make that announcement. And since then, it's been building positively towards, the start of the season. That said, I don't think any of us were expecting a 4-0 win. I think we were all cautiously optimistic that they'd be able to get a win at home. But they took a 1-0 lead in the first half. And then in the second half, RSL was doing a really good job to push back. And then suddenly the Earthquakes get a second goal on a corner kick. Then they get a third goal on a beautiful ball over the top from Espinosa, finding a Seni Buda. And then they get a fourth goal from Vitor Costa. So they had goals from 3 defenders and an attacker off the bench. I mean, if you want to talk about best case scenario, that was pretty much how it went down. So right now, the Quakes are at the top of the table with goal differential, and they're atop the supporter shield. So everyone right now is happy. Of course, they could go 1-33 from the quote of Bruce Arena, which he said after the win on Saturday night. I don't think they will. But yeah, I mean, things right now feel pretty darn good.
Yeah, I was going to say the word is hope and excitement, I would say in this case. Now, playing, obviously, Chicho having played with RSL for so long, do you think that actually had an impact on his knowledge of his former teammates to maybe contribute to some of that?
I think it always helps when guys know what they're dealing with, when guys know what they're getting into. For me, that's always a situation where they can tell you some of the scouting reports to an extent, but I also think that it's somewhat of a more overblown storyline when sometimes when they say oh, well, especially in the NFL, they talk about it's oh, they came over, he can explain the playbook. It's no, they can explain their assignments. They don't know everything. It's something that I'm sure helps. But for me, RSL was playing split squad essentially. They had 7 changes to their CONCACAF Champions Cup matchup on Wednesday night. Some of those guys didn't even travel for that matchup. And then they, were suddenly in San Jose. Sure, there's narrow fatigue. And the first game boost of a coach in Major League Soccer, in the NFL, those to me are always, it feels like you can pencil in a win. I'm not every time, but oftentimes that first game under a new head coach, there's always a boost. And now with the Earthquakes going on the road to Sporting Kansas City, this is where reality kind of sets in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously talking sport, KC in this particular case. I mean, RSL obviously was playoff team. KC. What do you see in a match like that coming up? Because it is, like I said, you talk about the freshman match, and now it's what we'll call sophomore jinx. Will there be anything like that? What do you see coming up? Not just this week, but also, we got an 8-9 month season here.
Well, Sporting Kansas City, the Blue Hell, one of the most difficult places to play in all of Major League Soccer. So let's get that out of the way. That's where the Earthquakes lost in the playoffs in 2020 on penalties to Tim Melia. That's where they lost in 2023 in penalties to Tim Melia. So it's it's a difficult place to win. Great fans, though. Great environment. Obviously, that's a team that's made some changes. They move away from Johnny Russell in the offseason, and the team starts to take on a new identity. They're a bit of a unknown quantity at this point, but for the Earthquakes in the short term, before we look at the totality of the season, these first 7 games, 5 of them are at home. And if the Earthquakes want to reestablish themselves in this league, they need to do so early, and they need to take advantage of those first 5 of the first 7 that are at home. And so that's getting wins in those games. And then if you take care of business at home, you give yourself a very good chance in Major League Soccer. I mean, that's just, job number one. If you can get, mostly wins at home and, pick up a draw or maybe more out of those 2 road games, then, you feel like you're sitting pretty. And I think obviously you want to win every game clearly, but sports is not like that. But, I think that for San Jose, they need to go in and see if their good vibes that they had in game number 1 travel. No one knows much about this team right now. I'll be the first to tell you that. We saw a game on Saturday night that was the opposite of everything we saw in 2024. 2024, if it could go wrong, it did go wrong. Saturday night, if it could go right, it did go right. So while that was encouraging, I'm not taking anything away from the guys. It's like, we got to wait and see what this team can do on the road in a place like Sporting Kansas City, who is obviously dealing with their own midweek game. But if there's ever going to be a reality check early on in a season, it's going to be in KC.
Actually, let's talk about KC for a quick second, because KC obviously had CONCACAF, and the weather in that game for Inter Miami, was I think 5 or 6 degrees, negative at 15. This is something that I know the league has talked about, and I know Don Garber's talked about changing the schedule a little bit. We'll come back to the earthquakes in a second. I just want to get your feel on this. Do you feel that it's possible that the schedule sometime in the next year or 2 years might get pushed back a little bit to avoid games like this and weather like this for 150-pound guys in shorts?
I don't know because they've also talked about switching to the European calendar to try and line up those dates. And I always just say, if you've been in a cold weather city in the United States in the winter months, like there's a reason why the Vikings play inside. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why, the Green Bay Packers, why, a doctor called, Fox to let them know that Tom Coughlin had frostbite on his face in an NFC championship game. Like this is, and it's not like Tom Coughlin, being from New York, was unaware of, cold temperatures. Like, but you're talking about, I've been in New York when the polar vortex was there during the Super Bowl Radio Row in 2014. That was cold. Yeah. Nobody wants to play sports outdoors in that weather. And you've built all these sports or soccer specific stadiums that are, outdoor and, just beautiful places. So, they might have to make adjustments or, try and figure something out. I don't know what they can do with, CONCACAF Champions Cup because it is, it's early on there. Sure. It's, before the good weather in the US, but, to the greater topic of changing the schedule overall in Major League Soccer, like I don't think you want to go against the NFL and the NBA and NHL. I think you've got a much better chance going up against MLB in the summertime and, dealing with the NFL and those other winter sports towards the end. I mean, it's hard. Sports has a lot of competition, but I always feel like when people bring up the weather, they don't understand how cold it can get in Kansas City or how brutal it could be in Minnesota or New York, or the fact that it does snow in so many places along the eastern seaboard. Just not all the time, but it gets cold. Like I've been at one Orange Ball game, I want to say, back in 2015 when the Earthquakes visited New England. It was a lot of snow the night before and a little bit during the game. It was cold, but it was playable. Like there's a big difference between snow, cold, and playable and what you can get a lot of the rest of the winter time.
Well, RSL had that snow game last year. I think it was a game one.
It was ridiculous.
Sword, I think, in that one too.
It was ridiculous. I mean, you're just watching and the ball doesn't move. I mean, I understand you want to play in all conditions and get the game in because people, they change their schedules for it. But there's a level of being realistic, of practicality. It's not like football where you can just run the ball. It's like the ball moves on the ground in soccer.
Well, also in the NFL, you got guys that are, 250, 300, 350 pounds and padding too.
Yes.
So, it's kind of like when you have somebody that heavy, you've got basically, it's like having an animal, strapped to your chest.
Insulation.
Your lap. Yeah. To stay warm. So you get these guys that, sometimes come up from Brazil or places like this where they've never experienced, they never even saw snow before, and these poor kids are freezing. But that's why I was just curious a little bit, maybe, do they change it? I mean, like I said, Don Garber has talked about the possibility of it. It remains to be seen, but I think it could happen at some point. But back to basically where we were talking in this case, with the earthquakes themselves, obviously a little bit of an X factor with KC, but talk a little bit about the vibe, with the fan base, with the city, because obviously, you understand this fully well. The Sharks are struggling as well. So the entire city of San Jose, I almost wonder, are they latching onto the earthquakes right now because of the offseason moves and being like, okay, I think maybe we got something to get behind here?
There was definitely a buzz in the offseason when they signed Arena and then they got Chicho and Joseph. I mean, I think everybody was kind of aware of, okay, the things are a little bit different right now. And I think that nobody's specifically like latching on, and people know that the Sharks are going through a rebuild. At least theirs was a little bit more planned than what the Earthquakes went through last year. Their general manager was very upfront about it. But with San Jose Earthquakes right now, I think people are excited to see the investment from the front office, to see the changes being made. Because even before with Lucci, they had spent more money than they'd ever spent before, but it didn't yield results. So now they're continuing to spend money and investing in team facilities, and they're trying to create a bigger private and public training facility with the county of Santa Clara and the city of San Jose at the fairgrounds to try and continue to invest in the area. But for the fan base, everybody knew last year was not what we expected, but it was just kind of like another, kind of punch in the face of what's been, a up and down time since the team came back to Major League Soccer in 2008. There haven't been a ton of playoff appearances, and even since the team opened the new stadium in 2015, there hasn't been a home playoff game. So I think everyone's kind of waiting to blow the roof off. They want to have that moment. They want to have that home playoff game. And I think with Bruce Arena, the most decorated soccer coach in American history, and some big offseason signings, and the idea that maybe they might not be done in terms of bringing in talent, I don't know if this window or the next, but that's what some of the rumor mongering has been. I think people are excited of what San Jose can do this year. And you get a 4-0 win in night number one when you got guys like Dave Romney. I talked to him the Wednesday before the game, and he was saying like, oh, we're rough around the edges. It's a work in progress. And then everything hits the ground running, clicks cohesively. It was like, oh, okay, then maybe this team has something here.
Nice. So talk a little bit. Obviously, we've already talked about Martinez and Chicho. Who else do you see maybe that's flying under the radar, at least for right now, that you're like, you know what? I think these guys are going to actually be able to pick up 7, 8, 9 goals, and get noticed.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, there's Christian Espinosa, the Earthquakes DP right winger, who has been kind of one of the best kept secrets in Major League Soccer since he came in 2019. He's now the team's all-time assist leader. Just consistent. You can pencil him in for like 13 assists a year. That's pretty much what he's had every year since he entered the league. And 2 years ago in 2023, he had 13 goals and 13 assists. His goal scoring production might go up, but I think you have to look at Hernan Lopez, who was the DP10 that they acquired on a record fee last spring. Him with the ability to distribute to Chicho and Joseph and Christian Espinosa, the way those guys can all work together, there's a lot of potential there for his numbers to go up, because he came in last year, the team was 1-8-1. And, obviously there's only 5 more wins after that, a bit of a lost season. We had an idea of what he'd be. So I think we're excited there. But you look at, young players like an Oscar Verhoeven, who was, got some starts last year as a homegrown towards the end of the year. There was definite potential that was seen there. Nico Chakiris, he's made his debut at 16 back in 2022 and has gotten better and better each following year. I think they're waiting for him to have that breakthrough year. I think really, though, it's a lot of wait and see right now. And I know that's, I'm not trying to give it as a cop-out, but it's like we don't know everything about this team as of yet. We don't know what Bruce Arena's, sub situation is going to be. Like with previous teams, you figure it out pretty quick what they're going to do. When Bruce Arena was making changes the other night, I was like, oh, okay, that's where they're going right now. I had no idea what he was going to do next. Amal Pellegrino, though, had 7 goals last year. And I think that if he can figure Major League Soccer out, he could probably bump that up to like 12 to 15. He's got a great shot. He's got great instincts. I think last year he just, came in late to camp, and then the team was kind of just, they were out of sorts, for lack of a better term. So he's the guy who I think, as an existing goal scorer, could probably have the biggest blow up.
Nice. All right. On the other side of the ball, basically going towards goalkeeping and defense, what do you project and what are you seeing that for this year?
Well, the other night they had a 3-man back line of Rodriguez, Dave Romney, and Bruno Wilson. Because they had height of Romney and Rodriguez on the outside, every cross that came in, those guys were all over it. You could not get interior penetration from the outside that way. So that was really nice to see, the height, the experience that both Rodriguez and Romney have. And then Bruno Wilson, who showed a great promise last year, is healthy. So he was fun to watch as well. So I think that, a team that gave up an MLS record 78 goals a year ago, to have a clean sheet right off the bat, like, boy, that's a big sign of what you wanted to see. Because the questions were always about defense. I mean, you looked at, Christian Espinosa and Joseph Martinez, Chicho Arango, as well as Hernan Lopez, Amal Pellegrino. It was like, okay, they're going to be able to score some goals. But the defense, that was a big question mark. So they answered that in spades. Also, they parted ways in the offseason with designated player, Carlos Carrezo, who was a 6 defensive midfielder, who never quite lived up to that billing when he came in 2023. He had some good moments, but wasn't consistent enough, in my opinion. They part ways with him. They mutually terminate the contract. Ian Harkes, a veteran, comes in and plays in that midfield, and he just kind of locked things down. He was not very involved in the offense for the most part of the game, but he looked confident and comfortable in covering space and winning balls. And then Bo LaRue was drafted last year, 42nd overall out of San Jose State. He made his MLS debut on Saturday night and subbed out after the first half. I think his hamstring was barking a little, but he played really well and was good as a box-to-box midfielder. And everything about the Earthquakes, when they moved one way, they had cover in behind. If they went the other direction, they had cover behind. And there weren't a lot of open spaces. And they, again, were running a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-2-1, however you want to classify it. But they were really well structured and really coordinated in their defensive zone working. So that was really positive to see. And again, one game against RSL. So RSL, to be fair, also lost 60% of their goal scoring over the offseason. So from a year ago, better because Andres Gomez, they sold mid-year for $13 million. But it's hard to say one team is the indicative of what we'll see all year. But it was most definitely, for San Jose's defensive issues compared to last year, a step in the right direction.
Sure. Now, looking forward in this particular case, if you go back, I think since 2019, 2020 COVID year notwithstanding, ninth place, I believe, has landed between 40 and 47 points. 40 being the all-time low with what happened last year in the East. But conservatively, let's say 45 points would probably get you into 8th or ninth place. Is 45 doable for this team?
Yeah, I think so. I think that last year, and it was one of the things that Bruce Arena pointed out at his introductory press conference, was the 21 points a year ago was no way indicative of the talent that was on the team. It should have been a much better team. I don't know that they were going to be great or anything like that, but they should have been at least in like playoff discussion till later in the year. They might have dropped off, but it shouldn't have been a historically bad team. So I think that while the correction from the outside will take people by surprise, from the inside, you kind of see like, yeah, last year, to my earlier point, if it could go wrong, it did go wrong. And this year, they should, in my opinion, be able to get at least an 8th or a ninth spot in the playoffs in the seeding. I think the goals are much higher, but I think that, when all is said and done, when looking at the talent that they have, I think the expectation is, 8th or ninth at worst.
Nice. Hey, listen, that's just, like I said, it's a start. This is a team that's building to 2026 too. So It's not the be all and end all. It's the growth process from where you are to where you're going. So there is a lot to be excited about with this squad right now, and obviously for you personally, it's a lot more fun, I'm sure, when you have, matches like you had the other night and what you can get excited to see this season. Yeah. So figure wrap this up because I know you're a busy man. I want to respect that a little bit. Important question here. How can people find you on social media? I know you got the LinkedIn, you got Twitter and all that kind of stuff. Where can people find you?
On Twitter, I'm at Ted Ramey Media. I think on Instagram, I'm just Ted Ramey. I think I'm Ted Ramey on Blue Sky. I always just tell people, like, look for a smiling bald man with a microphone and a beard. Like that's usually, I think that's like the profile pic. And it should be pretty easy to find. And then, I try to stay pretty active on social, and then YouTube as well. I post a lot of interviews with stuff from the Quakes and the Sharks there as well.
Nice. So we'll put that. Yeah, so appreciate that. We'll definitely put that at the bottom. But yeah, Mr. Ramey, I appreciate the time. Thank you. Love to be able to talk maybe the Earthquakes a little bit later in the season. Once we get a little bit further into it. So if you're available, I'd love to make that happen. And otherwise, appreciate the time. Stay well.
Thank you very much.
No problem.